Hello, it's Nicole, and today we're going to do a lesson on learning targets or can-do statements. So by the end, you'll be able to explain the structure and purpose of the can-do statements, which are actually tiered into three levels: benchmarks, indicators, and can-do statements. And they were created by the National Council of State Supervisors of Foreign Language and the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages. And another objective is that you will be able to develop sample student activities that align to the can-do statements. But this objective you'll really be able to show us over the course of this Star Talk program as you're designing learning episodes for your learners. As you take a look at this picture, what would you do if I asked you to try to put this puzzle together? I mean, if this is all you've got is just this pile of puzzle pieces, I assume you would probably do what I would do, which is start looking for ways to help organize this task. So you're going to look for pieces with straight edges, or you're going to try to group colors together so that you can make some sense of this. But really, you don't even know what you're trying to do because you don't know what the finished product is supposed to look like. Most of the time, when we buy a puzzle, it comes with a picture. And that picture is actually really important because it tells me what I should be striving for, what I'm trying to achieve or accomplish in a very clear way that everyone can understand. And teaching is a lot like that. We shouldn't be hiding the goal from our students. We shouldn't be giving them this pile of work without them understanding what they are trying to achieve. So that's the focus of our work today. We're going to be examining how proficiency-driven world language learning targets can drive purposeful instruction, practice, and assessment by giving us a clear sense of where to go and a clear vision of what success or achievement of the product look like. So as I mentioned, these were actually created for us by Novice-mid and Actful, so we don't have to start from scratch. And their document is pretty robust. There's a lot in there, and it organizes the can-do statements into three tiers or types of statements, and it does that for every mode of communication. So there's these three tiers for interpretive communication, 3 tiers for interpersonal, 3 tiers for presentational, and 3 tiers for intercultural communication. At the top level, you have what are called the benchmarks. These are the overarching features of language performance. They really talk about the way a student uses and communicates in the language when they aren't in the classroom, and there's no books, no notes, no teacher. The performance indicators actually break down the benchmark by focusing on certain aspects of language performance, certain kinds of tasks in each mode, giving us a little bit more specific information about the student's performance. Often, these performance indicators are used as end-of-unit goals or end-of-chapter goals. And then the third tier are always the example can-do statements, and these examples give really concrete illustrations of the kinds of tasks, the specific tasks that students can do if they are able to achieve these performance indicators. And they are so specific that they can be used to help teachers design instruction at the lesson level, from what kind of input the teacher will give, how they will check for understanding, how the students will practice, and even what the performance assessment will look like. So before we progress from there, we want to take a quick look at proficiency, and it's really important to distinguish a student's level in a course from their stage or range of proficiency. Levels like Spanish 2, Arabic 4, they just organize students into groups that work for school schedules. They don't tell me anything about what the student knows and can do. A stage of proficiency, however, gives me information about what the student can do consistently, spontaneously, and accurately when they are communicating in an interpersonal situation, when they are trying to understand what they read or hear, and when they are presenting information to others. In order to really use these tiered can-do statements, it's important that we understand the proficiency ranges. And there again, Actful, the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages, gives us a lot of help because they came up with this graphic of this inverted pyramid to help us understand what the proficiency ranges mean. So you'll notice that the novice range here at the bottom has the smallest piece of the pyramid, just the little tip. Not very much can fit in there. And that's because for the novice user of language, there really isn't very much that they can do yet. They communicate, but the way they communicate is with memorized chunks and phrases. They don't understand how the language works. And when they try to put together pieces of the language, there's a breakdown in communication because they can't do it correctly yet. People who are speaking up the intermediate range, however, they are the first group of users that can actually create with language. They can break apart pieces of language and recombine them to say new things and be accurate and be understood. But there is still some limitation because they still rely on familiar topics, simple transactions in their everyday environment. They'll struggle if there's a complication or something, a situation they haven't experienced a lot. And they can really only do this in present and past time frames. So in present and past time frames, but if they try to talk about what will happen or what should happen, they'll struggle. This is where our advanced language users come in. Our advanced language users can completely break apart and recombine the language to say new things, do so with accuracy, and do it in much more settings, not just the familiar, not just the everyday settings. And they can do all major time frames. They can go back and forth to say what happened last weekend and how that will affect what will happen tomorrow and what we should do next, because they are at this higher range of proficiency. In fact, it's important to note that native speakers spend most of their time talking to other people at advanced low, which is right here, low, mid, and high. So advanced low is where most of us talk to other people who speak our language. If that's the case, that gives us really important information about what we should be expecting from our learners, because if we speak our native language at advanced low, it's very unlikely that our learners are going to surpass us while they are in high school, for example. So now that we're ready to look at the can-do statements from ACTFL, we're going to look at the tiered approach again, but we're going to take one little chunk of the entire document. So we're going to look at interpersonal communication, which is that two-way spontaneous communication at the novice range. We're going to start with the benchmark. The benchmark says that this person can communicate in spontaneous, spoken, written, or signed conversations on very familiar everyday topics with practiced or memorized words and phrases. That's that global statement, what they can do when they're not in the classroom. So it's repeated here. This is just copied directly off their website. The benchmark is repeated here, but now we have some indicators. One specific type of interpersonal communication is exchanging information and ideas in conversations. So some performance indicators, like chapter level goals, if you will, for novice low, mid, and high. Novice low can provide information by answering questions, but they can't ask them yet. So they only use practiced or memorized words and phrases to answer questions. Novice mid can ask and answer simple questions on very familiar and everyday topics, still using practiced or memorized words and phrases. Novice high, however, can request and provide information with some original questions, not just memorized, because they're starting to make progress towards being intermediate. So remember, the benchmark is the big global, very general term. Then we have performance indicators for specific types of use of interpersonal communication. And now we're going to see some example lesson can-do statements that would support the ability to ask and answer questions about themselves and others. So for example, I can contribute to a conversation about music by giving an example of a style I like. I can answer questions about who is in my family. As you see these can-do statements, you realize that they mirror the kinds of things we teach in class on a day-to-day basis, and that was done on purpose. Also notice that they always start with a customizable can-do statement. In other words, this list is not the end of the possibilities. It's simply a guide to give me as the teacher an idea of the kind of skills I can expect my students to try to do in a lesson when they're functioning at novice mid for a conversation in which they will exchange ideas. So if we take a look at how this looks on the website, when we get to the website for novice, you actually have the big global benchmarks for all of the modes of communication, including intercultural. And in this case, they actually provide the intermediate ones as well, so that you can see the difference between what the novice can do and what the intermediate user can do. But remember, these are too global. They don't give enough information for me to know as a teacher what that looks like on a day-to-day basis. So then we're going to go down to the indicators. Remember that for every mode of communication, you have the benchmark, but then you have specific types of, in this case, interpretive communication, and you have your indicators for novice, low, mid, high, for different kinds of interpretive, then interpersonal, and then presentational and intercultural communication. And now that we've seen the benchmark and the indicators, we come to the example can-do statements. So here you have the benchmark, the kind of task for interpretive communication, the indicators for that task, and then the very lesson-specific can-do statements, always starting with the ability to customize a statement that is similar in terms of the amount of language or difficulty required. So these can-do statements provide meaningful objectives that both teachers and students can understand. Basically, they give us a target. They give us that puzzle picture, what it is we're supposed to be trying to do. As you saw, they're organized by proficiency range and mode of communication. And for teachers, they actually really help me sequence instruction. And for students, because students should be using the can-do statements also, they actually can be used for self-assessing and reflection, as well as for goal setting. Here's an example document that I actually give to my students. At the top, you can see some of the can-do statements for this next unit of instruction, because I give this out before the unit starts, and I color-coded it. So for this can-do statement, I can understand questions asked of me about my childhood. Here, down here, is how the students will be assessed. So I'm telling my student what the can-do is and how they'll be assessed. They will participate in an interview about their childhood. That matches the can-do statement. In addition, I can understand a short summary of a historical figure's accomplishments. They will research and note on a historical figure for a presentation. They will answer questions about the daily life of a historical figure. They will prepare an exhibit about a historical figure. So you'll notice that these can-do statements can actually be used to provide students with information not just about what they will learn, but how they will show what they learned. These are some examples of reflections that students did where they talked about what they can do after a unit of study and did some goal setting. So kind of like what I was saying earlier, let's look at Novice-mid Interpersonal communication. I can give times, dates, and weather information. If I've selected this as a can-do statement that I want to work on with my learners, the next thing I'm going to do is decide what the performance assessment will look like, just like I did here, where I have the can-do statement and here's how it will be assessed. And you'll notice it kind of matches the can-do statement. If the can-do statement is give times, dates, and weather, then the performance assessment will require students to, for example, state the date of an event or tell me the weather for tomorrow. Next, I'm going to list the knowledge that my students will need in order to achieve this target. And for novice, that means I'm going to list the memorized words and phrases that my students have to know and understand. Now that I have the target, the assessment, and the list of necessary knowledge, I'm able to plan my lessons, my practice, my checks for understanding, my formative assessments, essentially the entire lesson sequence. So everything that you need, I've actually put all the links in Canvas for you so that you will be able to explore these can-do statements. So go ahead and return back to the module so that you can continue your work in this area.